Good morning. Today's topic is populations and population growth. So the first type of population growth is exponential growth. Exponential growth is you just keep doubling. So you start with 2 and you go to 4 to 8 to 16 to 32. Every time there's a new generation, it doubles the population of the old generation. So this is the simplest form of population growth. The population grows and expands faster and faster and faster. It kind of snowballs. And the thing you need to know about exponential growth is that it may occur in nature for a short period of time, but it's not going to occur for a long period of time. And when we say organisms are going to do this for a short period of time, we are generally talking about bacteria. Bacteria will show a period of exponential growth and then die off, and then show a period of exponential growth and then die off. Most of our other species, as you're going to see in our next type of growth, will have a period of exponential growth and then they'll level off because there's something that exponential growth really doesn't take into account. And that's in exponential growth, nothing ever dies. And we know that a factor of life is that things eventually die. So we don't see exponential growth as a lifestyle, as a continued way of life for most organisms. Logistical growth is what we see. So in your notes, you're going to want to draw this graph, and you're going to need to know these different points on the graph. So it's a growth in which there are three or a series of phases, and it ends in something called steady state. Steady state is where the number of individuals entering the population equal the number of individuals leaving the population. Well, how does something enter a population? It gets born. How does something leave a population? It dies or gets eaten. So we have this balanced, and if you look over a long period of time, over a year, 5 years, 10 years, the growth of that population is actually at zero. On any given year, it might go above steady state or above carrying capacity, and on any given year, it might be below, but over an average long period of time, it's going to level out at a nice zero. So what are these points? At A, the species is first introduced into the population. And the species, there's only a few of them, and they're getting used to their new habitat, and they're finding food, and they're reproducing. But because there's only a few of them, and they're still kind of feeling out the space, they're not reproducing at a very quick rate. So the growth is slow there. At B, we have a little bit of exponential growth. We're used to our environment now. We know where the resources are. We know where the food and the water is. And our population is so low that all of that is in abundance, that there's a lot of food and there's a lot of water and there's a lot of territory. So we start reproducing. And at B, Grandma, Grandpa, Bunny are still young enough that they're alive. And so we see this period of exponential growth, but it doesn't last long. At C, our growth starts to slow. We start to see our elders in the population start to die off of old age. We start to see that the resources are thinning, that our population is so big that everyone's getting a fair share of food, but maybe some of the weaker in the population aren't eating enough to reproduce. And so we're still growing, but we're growing at a slow rate. At D, our population reaches its peak. This is the maximum number of individuals that can survive in this environment. So this is the maximum number of individuals that there's enough food for. This is the maximum number of individuals that there's enough territory for. Maximum number of individuals that there's enough water for. And so this is your population at peak. We call E steady state. And remember, when you hit steady state, you have zero growth. On average, not on a given day, not on maybe even a given year, but on average, you have zero growth. So what terms do you need to know? Growth. Growth occurs when birth rate's higher than death rate. So your population's going to grow if you have more individuals being born than dying. Steady state, when there's no population growth on average. Carrying capacity, the average number of individuals in a population at steady state. So what limits growth? Two things that are going to limit your growth: density dependent and density independent. And if you take a second and think about these terms, density means how many individuals, right? So if we are in a high density classroom, there's 40 or 50 people in my class. If we're at a low density, there's 2. I think my smallest class this year is 2. So density dependent, how close are you? Dependent means it depends on your density. So how much the factor influences or affects the population is dependent on how big the population is. The other one's density independent. Doesn't matter how big the population is. It's independent of the density. So density dependent means that the extent to which a factor limits a population growth is dependent on the number of individuals already in that population. And we're going to go over that in a minute. Density independent means that the factor limits population growth regardless of the number of individuals. So let's give some examples of these. By the way, remember back to our factors of life, a limiting resource is something that you need to survive, but is in short supply. If a lot of things are in short supply, the limiting resource is the one that will kill you first. So density dependent factors. The first one is competition. So if there's only a limited amount of resources available, the individuals will compete for those resources. And if there's a lot of competition, those weakest or slowest aren't going to get it. They're not going to get to reproduce. Or at worst case scenario, they're going to die. Another density dependent factor is predation. Predation is, remember, the act of one organism eating another. And here is your first NODA science fact. Predation limits a population, right? So if you have a lot of coyotes eating the bunnies, guess what happens to the bunny population? It goes down. If the predators don't eat too many individuals, then birth rate replaces those that die, keeping the population steady state. This is the reason why bunnies have so many babies, because intrinsically they know that some of their babies aren't going to make it, that some of their babies are going to be coyote food. But if they have a ton of babies, then some will get to survive to adulthood and reproduce. If predation is intense, the population decreases. The number of prey and the number of predators are interrelated. If the predators eat all the prey, they'll begin to starve to death. And if the predators are scarce, then the prey will get to reproduce a lot and their population will go up. This is what a predator-prey relationship graph looks like. And you can note that it vacillates, right? It goes up and down. So prey are introduced into the population right here. Your prey are the dark maroon. And they're happy and they multiply. And then the predators go, dude, there's bunnies over there. And the predators come and the predators start eating the prey. And because the predators have a lot of food, they get to reproduce a lot, but the prey go down. So now there's no bunnies left on campus because the coyotes have eaten a lot of them. And so then the coyotes move on, go somewhere else. And so their population drops, allowing the bunnies to come back. The good news here is that predators often have a lot of variety in their diet. So our coyotes are not just eating the bunnies, they're eating the squirrels and they're eating the little yappy dogs in your neighborhood. They're eating the cats that people think are okay to let roam the neighborhood. The coyotes have a lot of variety, and because they have a lot of variety, they're not preying upon any one population to the point that they're going to cause a decrease in that population. Some predators will only take a nibble. They'll take a bite out of their prey, and then that prey can survive and still reproduce and still live. Most prey items usually have some defense. Have you ever tried to catch a bunny? It's not easy, right? That's their defense. Very few things go, oh, fine, whatever, eat me. I'm done. I quit, right? They've got hooves that can kick, and they've got teeth that they can bite, and they've got nails they can scratch where they're really fast. They've got some way of preventing the predator from eating them. All right, more. Parasitism. Remember, parasitism is one organism that lives on or in another organism, eventually causing harm to the host. Parasites are spread among individuals. So remember when you were in elementary school and they used to do those head lice checks? Lice is a predator. And if you're in high density, if you're close together like you are at school and you're napping and you're playing and your hair is touching, you can spread lice to each other. But if you're at home and you are never in contact with another individual, then you're not going to get the lice. Same thing's happening out in our wild population. If there's a lot of individuals in close contact, they're going to spread parasites among them. Crowding and stress. The more individuals in a population, the faster they use up the resources. The less the resources, the more stress on the individual. The more crowded the population, the more stress comes in, and the more stressed you are, the more weakened your immune system is. So think about all of your teachers that are stressed to the max right now. Our immune systems are probably at rock bottom, and so we are more prone to disease. And if we are in a high density area, we are more prone to catch disease because our immune system's weakened by the stress. This is why I haven't eaten in a restaurant, right? I don't want to be in a dense area when I know my immune system is weakened. All right, density independent factors. These are the things that are going to kill you regardless of how many individuals are in your population. Climate is our main density independent factor. If we have a sudden freeze, right? Like all of a sudden we hit 32 degrees and it starts snowing and it snows for a week. Does it matter how many lizards are in Mission Viejo? No, they're all going to freeze to death. So climate is a huge density independent factor. It doesn't matter how many individuals are in the population, they're all going to be equally affected. When we talk about climate factors, El Nino, which we see here in Southern California, is a major effect. That's it, guys. That's your populations in a nutshell.